You should move into a nursing home, Evelyn. My house isn't meant for old women. That's what my daughter-in-law said, not shouted, not whispered, just said, like she was commenting on the weather. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The sound of dishwater dripping off my fingers seemed louder than her voice. My house? I remember thinking. The same house my husband built, where my son took his first steps, where every wall still carried our laughter. I stood there in the kitchen, heart thudding slow and heavy, watching that polite little smile on her face. It wasn't cruelty shouted from anger, it was cruelty spoken with calm precision, and right then, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a game, and Evelyn Carter, 69 years old and supposedly naive, had just been invited to play. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel. We're creating a community of people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. Before Lily came into our lives, my days had their own rhythm, quiet, gentle, predictable. The kind of rhythm only small-town mornings can offer. Every day began with the old coffee pot sputtering to life on the counter, its burbles echoing through my little cottage like an old friend clearing his throat. I'd stand by the window while the sun painted the maple trees gold, listening to the distant whistle of the 7:10 freight train that always passed behind town. The smell of toast, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of Harold's rocking chair, they were my morning choir. Harold, my husband, had been gone nearly 10 years. Cancer took him quickly, but not before he made me promise 2 things: keep the garden alive and take care of Nathan. So I did both faithfully. My garden still bloomed wild every spring, roses, petunias, and those stubborn hydrangeas that refused to behave, and Nathan grew into a man Harold would have been proud of, kind, hard-working, patient to a fault. Nathan was my only child, and like most mothers, I probably loved him a little too fiercely. After Harold passed, he made a point to stop by every Sunday. We'd sit on the porch swing, he with his coffee and me with my sweet tea, watching the world go by. Sometimes he'd fix things around the house, the loose gate latch, the leaky faucet, and sometimes we just talked. About work, about the neighbors, about how quiet life had become. Then one Sunday, he came with that look. You know the one, that shy, glowing look men get when they've found someone they can't stop thinking about. Her name's Lily, he said, trying to sound casual. I think you'll like her, Mom. When I finally met her, I wanted to believe him. Lily was lovely, polished, the kind of young woman who could charm an entire room with one smile. She showed up in a yellow sundress, holding a homemade pie like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her voice was soft, her manners graceful. She hugged me tightly, called me Mrs. Carter, and blushed when I told her to call me Evelyn. Oh, I couldn't, she'd said. That just feels too formal. You're Nathan's mom. Can I call you Mom? It melted my heart, and so it began. Dinners together, phone calls, weekend visits. She'd bring me flowers, ask about my recipes, sit at the kitchen table while I taught her how to make Harold's favorite apple cobbler. I remember thinking, how lucky can one woman be? When Nathan announced their engagement 6 months later, I clapped my hands like a little girl. The church wedding was small but perfect, white daisies on the pews, the scent of cinnamon candles in the air. As I watched them exchange vows, I whispered to Harold in my heart, "You'd like her, darling. She's good for our boy." After the wedding, they needed a place to live. Nathan had just started a new job and money was tight. So I did what any mother would do. I gave them our house on Maple Street, the one Harold had built with his hands. "I'll move into the cottage," I told them. "Closer to the church, smaller to clean. You two deserve a home that already knows love." Nathan protested, but Lily insisted they'd take care of it. Her eyes sparkled when she promised to keep the garden blooming. It warmed me to think of young laughter filling those rooms again. For a while, things really were good. Lily called me Mom every time she saw me. She'd show up with fresh cookies or a jar of homemade jam. On Sundays, she'd insist I join them for dinner. The 3 of us would laugh around the table, Nathan holding her hand, me feeling quietly grateful. She had this way of making everything seem easy, too easy. Always smiling, always perfect. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, that kind of look you can't quite read. But I brushed it off. Maybe I was just being silly. Maybe it was just my imagination. Life rolled on like that for nearly a year. Holidays, birthdays, lazy afternoons on the porch. My neighbors would say, "Evelyn, you're lucky. Your daughter-in-law's a gem." And I'd smile and agree, but even then, long before the mask slipped, there was something under the surface. Something careful, something waiting. And as I'd soon learn, every game begins long before the first move is made. I always believed that the first crack in a good story didn't happen with a shout. It started with a whisper, a word a little too sharp, a smile held a second too long, a kindness that felt rehearsed. With Lily, those whispers began to gather like clouds no one else could see. The first little cloud drifted in on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd made a pot of beef stew, Harald's old recipe, the one that tasted like winter and patience, and decided to walk it over to the house on Maple Street. Our house. Lily opened the door in a swish of perfume and pastel, her hair pinned just so, eyes bright with surprise that didn't look quite happy. "Oh," she said, and her smile clicked on like a porch light. "Mom, how sweet. You didn't have to." "I know," I told her, lifting the warm casserole carrier. "But I wanted to." She took the pot but didn't move to let me in. The hallway behind her was spotless, too spotless. No shoes by the door, no sweater tossed over the chair like Nathan used to leave, no life spilling out of its seams. The smell of lemon cleaner floated past her shoulder, and I felt suddenly like a guest in a showroom. "Busy day?" I asked, still smiling, gentle as a summer rain. She smoothed a lock of hair behind her ear, a practiced movement girls learn from mirrors. "Just organizing," she said. "Trying to get everything in order." I glanced past her shoulder again, and my eyes caught on the mantel. Harold's photo, the one of him with his fishing cap, grinning as if the world had told a joke only he could hear, was missing. In its place stood a silver-framed shot of Lily at the beach, sun-kissed and laughing, a breeze lifting her hair into a halo. A pretty picture, truly. But the absence thrummed in my ribs. "We'll have to eat the stew while it's hot," I said, still cheerful. "I can set the table." "Oh, I've actually got an appointment," she said quickly. "Waxing, it's booked weeks in advance. You know how that goes." I didn't know how that went, but I nodded anyway. "Of course," I said softly. "Enjoy, there's cornbread wrapped in the towel." "I'll have Nathan bring the dish back," she said, stepping back to close the door. "Thank you again, Mom, you're the sweetest." The latch clicked. Outside, the wind lifted a curl of magnolia leaves and set them dancing along the walk. Carried the weight of that moment home with me like a small secret stone in my pocket. Another small stone joined it the next Sunday. I'd always been invited, insisted upon, in a way that made me feel cherished, to Sunday supper at 6. This time the text came from Nathan at 4. "Hey Mom, rain check?" Lily's feeling a bit under the weather. 10 minutes later, I saw Lily breezing into Perks and Pies downtown with 2 friends, all giggles and clinking bracelets. I watched through the coffee shop window as she tossed her hair and tapped her phone with fast, sure thumbs. She never glanced toward the glass, but the way her smile widened felt like she knew I was there. "Your usual, Evelyn?" The barista, a sweet girl named Mary Saul, set the mug down with the kind of care young people save for their favorite grandmothers. I nodded, thanked her, and sat a while, listening to forks tap against pie plates and the low murmur of people telling each other their ordinary lives. I told myself I was being sensitive, that young women were allowed to break plans, to change their minds, to decide that friends and laughter were the heavy things giving their weekends shape. I sipped my coffee and watched the streetlights wink on in the early dusk. Then I walked home, slow, the backs of my heels whispering against my shoes. People think suspicion arrives like thunder. In truth, it came to me in the quiet, a different scent in the hall, a misplaced blanket, a set of keys no longer hanging on the familiar hook. Lily had a way of tidying that felt like erasing. The throw pillows Harold hated because they were scratchy, gone. The Afghan my sister knit in 1979, the one with the brave orange squares, folded and tucked into a closet somewhere. At first, I thought I simply wasn't noticing things. But the house had a memory, and mine matched it beat for beat. There were gaps where love used to sit. One afternoon, I stopped by to drop off a basket of peaches from Mr. Dwyer's stand. Lily opened the door and stepped aside with a smile so wide you could see all her teeth. "Come in, Mom." Sit," she chirped, and I felt foolish for every doubt. She poured sweet tea, set out coasters, and chatted about her new job at the bank. The way small-town people do when they're trying to tell you they fit just fine. Then she glanced at the clock, her voice dipping cheerfully as she said, "By the way, Nathan's thinking about getting the deed paperwork updated. Just routine stuff, to keep things tidy. You know how banks like tidy." I stirred my tea. The ice clinked once, a clear bell. "Tidy is nice," I said, watching her face. She laughed quick, then took the conversation somewhere else. But it stuck with me, that little dance step, the way she said routine stuff, the way a person says, "Don't look too close." That evening, I pulled out my box of papers. Harold, God rest him, had labeled everything in his scratchy carpenter's hand: mortgage, insurance, deed, tax receipts. I ran my fingers along the edges as if the paper could speak back. The deed was still where it had always been, signed and notarized and filed as we'd done when we gave the house to Nathan as a gift, with the stipulation that the property would remain in his name with a life estate clause for me, a legal way of saying I had the right to live there, if I ever needed to, for the rest of my days. We'd done it to be prudent, not because we imagined needing it. I slept more easily that night, but not by much. Church is where you hear the truth about a town. Sometimes from the pulpit, sometimes in the parking lot. The following Sunday, after the last Amen, I was folding bulletins with a women's group when someone mentioned Lily's charity committee meeting. "Oh, she's running circles around those ladies," said Bernice, the pastor's wife, meaning it kindly. "Such leadership, such polish," added Mary Ellen, pinching her lips, meaning something else. "What do you mean?" I asked, still folding, still smiling. "She's got opinions," Mary Ellen said, keeping her voice low. "About everything. How the dinners should be plated, how the music should be, and where the table linens should come from. And she's very sure about who should be in charge." Mary Ellen glanced up, caught my look, and softened. "But she's sweet to you, Evelyn. That's what matters." I nodded and kept folding, the paper edges pressing faint white lines into my fingertips. Nathan and I kept our Sunday porch tradition, even after he married. But I noticed that lately, our conversations had acquired a chaperone named we, as if he was trying the word on for size. "We think you should take it easier with the garden." "Mom, it's a lot of work," he'd say, then catch himself and add, I think. We were wondering if it might be time to sell the cottage and move closer to us. "Oh, wait, I guess you are close," he'd say with an embarrassed chuckle. His eyes flicking toward the road like the house itself might overhear. He meant well. My boy always did. But sometimes a person's good heart gets wrapped in someone else's ribbon, and they don't notice until the bow is tied too tight. One late afternoon, after a quiet stretch of rocking and listening to the cicadas buzz like old radios, he said, "Lily thinks we should get the locks changed. For safety. New neighborhood routine." I tilted my head. The same street he'd ridden his bicycle down. The same lamppost he'd scraped his knee on. "Safety is smart," I said. "But I hope you'll keep me a key, Nathan." "Of course," he said, too quickly. "Of course, Mom." He did keep me a key. But he also stopped leaving the spare in the ceramic frog on the porch, the way Harold always had. Little things. Stones in the pocket. The day the sky finally broke open a little was the Tuesday I went over to drop off a casserole dish and walked in through the kitchen, the way I'd always done. The air conditioner hummed. The sink was spotless. Lily stood at the island, phone cupped to her ear, her voice low and sharp in that way people use when they want to cut without leaving marks. "I can't stand how she hovers," she was saying. "It's like she thinks this place still belongs to her. Nathan's too soft to see it. He's sentimental." I froze near the doorway, the linoleum cool beneath my solace. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but the words pinned me still. Then she saw me. "Oh," she said, bright again in an instant. "Mom, I didn't hear you." "You scared me." I should have said something. I should have asked, "Who were you talking about?" But I didn't. I apologized and set the dish down and listened to her tell me how adorable my apron looked. I went home with my heart thudding slow and serious, like a drum calling soldiers to formation. That night, I took out Harold's pocket notebook, the one he used to keep in his flannel shirt. On the first page he'd written, "Measure twice, cut once." I ran my finger over the words and whispered into the quiet, "All right, love. I'll measure." So I watched, not to catch her, but to understand her. I noticed how she offered to help at church only when there were eyes to see it. I noticed how she dismissed small-town people as cute, the way you talk about knickknacks. I noticed how, when I came over, she'd speak in stories that set her shining at the center like a jewel and rearranged everyone else as supporting cast. "Mom, can you show me that cobbler recipe again?" She'd say sweetly if Nathan was in earshot, then later she'd sigh and say, "It's so old-fashioned, all that sugar. We're trying to be healthier." She started to correct the way I folded towels. "Hotel style is nicer, don't you think? And to suggest I sell the rocking chair because it creaks and makes the living room feel tired." The word lingered between us like a fruit fly. Tired. When the neighborhood children knocked on Halloween, she handed out raisins and told me candy was an outdated tradition. I laughed then, because if the world had any order left, it must surely include sweet kids and sticky fingers and chocolate smudges on lips. But the laughter tasted like a paper napkin in my mouth. The weekend before it all changed, Nathan took me to Miller's Diner, Thursday meatloaf special, my favorite. The vinyl booth squeaked, the waitress called everyone hun, and the pie carousel spun as slow as a clock. Nathan squeezed my hand and looked at me like he was 12 again. "Mom," he said, "they're sending me to Denver. 2 weeks. Training and some meetings. I'll be back before Thanksgiving." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. He'd worked hard, and he deserved the kind of success that made his shoulders relax when he slept. He swallowed, glanced down at his plate, then up again. "Would you check in on Lily while I'm gone? She's a little anxious when I travel." "Of course," I said. "I'll bring over dinners. We'll watch those cooking shows she likes." He smiled then, relief washing over his face like sunlight after rain. He didn't ask if I'd be all right alone. He knew I would. I learned to be all right alone long ago. What he didn't know, what I didn't fully know, was how the quiet would sharpen my hearing. On the night he left, I walked with him to the car. The sky hung low and blue, the kind of evening that makes dogs bark once and settle. He hugged me, his chin resting on my hair like it had when he was tall enough to do so but still young enough to need it. "Back before you know it," he said. "I'll keep the porch light on," I told him. And we both smiled at the old family phrase. I watched his taillights turn the corner and disappear. Then I stood in the driveway a while, listening to the crickets and the distant television, laugh track drifting from someone else's living room. I didn't know it yet, but the game had just set up its board. The next morning I brought over a casserole and a deck of cards, thinking we'd play rummy and chat. Lily opened the door in silk pajamas and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mom," she said lightly, leaning on the doorframe. "You're sweet, but I've got a full day. Spa appointment, then a Zoom with my girls, then... Well, let's just say self-care is a priority right now." I nodded, my palms warm around the casserole dish. "Of course," I said. "I'll just leave this in the fridge." She stepped aside, but not far. As I slid the dish onto the glass shelf, I noticed the family photos had shifted again. Harold's fishing picture was still gone. A new trio stood in its place. Lily in 3 different outfits, 3 different beaches, 3 different summers. Pretty as a postcard. Not a trace of our past. When I turned to leave, she touched my elbow, her fingers cool and light. "By the way," she said, tone airy, "if you ever want to pop by, just text me first, so I can be decent." I smiled that small, grandmother smile people mistake for softness. "Of course, dear," I said. "Decency matters." As I walked home, the wind picked up and made the flag on Mr. Hollis's porch snap like a reprimand. I stopped at my gate and looked back down Maple Street. The house stood quiet, bright curtains breathing with the movement of the air conditioner. It looked like any other home. But homes talk, if you've lived in them long enough. And that house, the one Harold built, felt like it was holding its breath. I washed my hands when I got home and dried them on a towel that smelled faintly of lavender. Then I set the kettle on and found Harold's notebook again. Measure twice, cut once. I traced the words and whispered to the empty room, I'm measuring. That night, sleep came slowly. The clock clicked, the refrigerator hummed its old steady song, and somewhere a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. I listened to the dark, aware of it in a way I hadn't been since I was a new widow learning how to occupy only one side of a bed. In the morning, I woke with a kind of decision pressed into my chest like the mark from a heavy quilt. Nothing grand. Just a steady, quiet choice. I would stop assuming I was imagining things. I would watch, I would listen, and when the time came, I would be ready. The morning after Nathan left for Denver, the air felt thinner, like the house had taken a breath and didn't quite know how to let it out. I made oatmeal stirred in brown sugar and watched the steam curl up like ribbon. My spoon clicked against the bowl, gentle as rain on tin. I told myself I'd give Lily space. Let her call if she needed something. I'd made a promise to my son, check on her, keep things easy, and I meant to keep it. By midday, the cottage felt restless. I gathered some folded laundry I'd mended for Nathan, a sleeve that needed stitching, a button that had gone wandering, and decided to walk it over. Old habits. I texted Lily, polite as a church secretary, swinging by with laundry and banana bread. Back out in a jiffy. The message showed, delivered. No reply. Maple Street smelled of cut grass and gasoline. Mr. Hollis waved from his porch, the flag above him ticking against the pole. When I reached the house, I used my key, the one Nathan insisted I keep. The lock turned smooth as butter. Inside, the air conditioner hummed its steady song, and the lemon cleaner smell sat on the air like a plastic cover. Hello? I called light, not wanting to startle her. It's just me, honey. I'll leave this on the counter. I heard her before I saw her, that voice, lower than honey and sharper than a needle. She was on the phone, pacing the living room on bare feet, nails clicking against her glass of iced tea. No, listen, she was saying. He's gone for 2 weeks. If we're going to move this forward, this is the time. She's always around, and I'm not living in some shrine to his childhood. I'm 28, not 80. There was a laugh on the line I couldn't hear, only her answer to it. Yes, I told him she's lonely. I am sweet to her, please. She eats it up. She turned then, saw me in the doorway, and paused only a heartbeat. Then her smile slid on, smooth as a silk glove. Mom, she breathed. You scared me. My mouth tasted like metal. I texted, I said, useless as a wet match. Brought banana bread. Sweet, she said, as if the word itself was an accusation. Leave it on the counter. She didn't hang up. She didn't excuse herself. She just kept the phone pressed to her cheek with her shoulder and wandered back into the living room. Anyway, she murmured to whomever was on the other end, we'll talk later. I've got hospitality. She ended the call and looked at me with both eyebrows lifted as if asking, well, I'll get out of your hair, I said softly. Please do, she said, just as softly. The words didn't boom. They didn't need to. They slipped under my skin like cold water. I set the banana bread down, tucked the mended shirt under my arm, and walked home along the sidewalk that had once known my boy's skateboard scratches. By the time I reached my gate, my hands had stopped shaking. Not because I wasn't hurt. Because a part of me, very old and very sure, had stood up. Measure twice, cut once. Harold would have said, all right. I would start measuring with my eyes open. For 2 days. I tried absence the way you try a new pair of shoes, awkward, pinching. I cooked, I watered the garden, I folded laundry with the TV murmuring old sitcoms in the background. I waited to see if she'd reach out. She didn't. On the 3rd day, the cottage felt too small for my thoughts. So I walked to Perks and Pies for a coffee and a slice of something that could pass for comfort. I was stirring a packet of sugar when I heard Lily's laugh. It was a pretty sound when you didn't know better. Bells, glass, soft, pretty things. She was in the corner booth with 2 women I recognized from the bank, her hands moving as if she was arranging flowers in the air. And I said, bless her heart, but this is not a retirement community, Lily was saying. She's in and out like she owns the place. It's exhausting. Your mother-in-law? One of the women asked, glancing around like gossip might stain the curtains. She insists I call her mom, Lily said with a practiced little giggle. It's cute, but clingy. You know how some of them get. She made a fluttering motion near her chest, like she was shooing pigeons. I didn't breathe for a count of 5. The waitress set my coffee down with a small clatter, apologizing with her eyes. I lifted the cup, felt the heat in my palms, and took one careful sip. When I looked up again, Lily's gaze had flicked toward me. For a fraction of a second, her smile thinned, turned into something that showed the edges. Then it was back, radiant and harmless. "Hi, Mom," she called sweetly across the room. "We should do lunch." "Anytime," I said, my voice steady in a way I hadn't expected. I left half the pie on the plate and walked home with my thoughts folded tight. I knew then what the game was. She wanted me out of the house and out of the picture. She wanted the story to be hers, starring her, set by her, staged to her taste. My presence was noise, but knowledge alone wasn't a plan. A woman could know plenty and still be called a fool. If there's one thing you learn with age, it's that people believe what they can see. And what they could see of Lily was mostly ribbons. On Friday, I picked up the phone to call Nathan. I didn't want to trouble him, not while he was working hard and sleeping in a hotel bed he'd never see again. But I didn't know how to hold the silence that had turned this heavy. He answered on the second ring, breathless, pleased. "Mom, everything okay?" "Yes," I said. Then I told him about the banana bread visit and the phone call I'd overheard, not the words exactly, but the temperature of them. I told him I felt unsettled, unwelcome. He went quiet. I could picture him in a hallway, bag at his feet, forehead creasing, the way it did when math got hard in 8th grade. "Mom," he said carefully, "Lily's been stressed. She feels like she's being judged, living in our memories. She says she loves you, but sometimes she needs boundaries." "Boundaries," I repeated, tasting the syllables. "Is that what she told you?" "She didn't tell me anything," he said quickly. "We talk. You know. We're figuring things out." I swallowed and softened my voice the way you do when talking to a man who is also your child. "Nathan, love. Has she asked you to change locks? Or the deed?" "The locks for safety," he said. "The deed, Mom, what?" "No, why would she?" "Never mind," I said gently. "It was just a thought. You're busy. Eat something besides vending machine peanuts." "I'll be fine." "Mom," he said again, and there was tenderness and frustration and fatigue in it. "Please don't assume the worst." I promised I wouldn't. I ended the call and stood in my kitchen looking at the floral wallpaper Harold had hated and I'd kept because grief made me cling to foolish things. I pressed my palm to the wall and felt the coolness of plaster and the faint throb of the pipes, like a heartbeat you hear when you put your ear against someone's chest. The house still knew me, all right. If Nathan needed to see, I would give him eyes. The next day, Lily called me for the first time all week. "Mom," she said brightly, as if the world had been reset and we were back at some kind of beginning, "could you stop by? I actually need help with the laundry." "Of course," I said, as I always had. I walked over with my basket of clothespins and a comb I had stitched into myself like a hem. Lily met me at the door in leggings and lip gloss, phone in hand, smile on. The laundry room smelled like detergent, and the lemon polish she used on everything that didn't need lemon polish. She handed me a pile of towels and pointed to the washer. "Would you mind? Nathan's shirts too. I just can't keep up with everything. The house is a lot." Her voice had that brittle sweetness of a candy you suck on too long. I smiled and set to work, sliding shirts onto hangers, smoothing collars with my palm. She hovered, not watching the laundry so much as watching me handle it. "You know," she said lightly, leaning against the door jamb, "there's a really nice senior residence over on County Road 5. They've got bingo and a hair salon and everything. I drove by it yesterday. It looked happy." "May," I said, mouthful of pins. "County Road 5 is a bit far from the church." "But you could make new friends," she said, bright as the chrome on a new car. "And it would be so easy. No gardening, no maintenance. You could sell the cottage, have some fun, travel." I like my garden, I said, gentle as buttering bread. And I like my porch? She laughed, that careful little trill. Of course. But think about it. At your age, she didn't finish, but the sentence hung between us like a pulled plug. Later, I found a glossy brochure tucked under the sugar canister in my kitchen. The Oaks at County Road 5, Independent Living for Active Seniors. A yellow sticky note clung to the cover, tours daily. I ran my thumb over the curl of the L until the paper pilled. Sunday afternoon came. I baked a chicken, set aside a plate for Lily, and carried it down to the house with a jar of gravy. The door was ajar. I knocked anyway. In the living room, she called. She was sitting with her feet curled under her, the TV muted on some home improvement show where everything gets fixed in 30 minutes. She picked up the remote and turned the volume up just enough to create a distraction throughout the room. You can leave it on the table, she said without looking at me. Lily, I said. And my voice surprised me with its steadiness. Have I done something to upset you? She blinked slowly, composed herself, then smiled a smile that didn't mean anything. Of course not. Why would you think that? Because you asked me to text before coming. Because you've mentioned senior residences twice. Because you smile like you're holding a heavy bag I put there. Her eyes hardened, not much, but enough for a woman who has survived real winters to notice the drop in temperature. I'm just trying to set healthy boundaries, she said. It's 2020 whatever, Mom, we're modern. We communicate. I've been communicating since before you were born, I said softly. I use my mouth. Her laugh was small and sharp. You know, this house is a lot to manage, she said, glancing around as if the walls were an audience. It needs a woman who isn't. Tired, there it was. Put plainly. Cruelty without ornament. I didn't flinch. I set the chicken down and folded the towels I'd brought from the dryer. 1, 2, 3. I see, I said, and I did. She stood then, smoothing her leggings. And anyway, Nathan thinks, does he? I asked, and the quiet that followed was the first honest sound between us. Her chin lifted a fraction, like someone bracing for a photograph. He trusts me, she said. As he should, I said. As a man should trust his wife. She misread that as capitulation. She smiled like a cat finding the warmest spot on the rug. Good, she said. So you understand. I looked at the muted TV, at the couple on the screen holding hands in front of their new kitchen island, bright as an altar. I do, I said. I understand that you don't think I can see you. Her smile faltered, then returned. We'll talk later, Mom. I've got a Zoom call. Of course, I said, gathering my empty hands. I stepped out into the late afternoon and let the sun press its warmth into my shoulders. The cicadas were singing their old electric hymn. Down the block, kids were chalking crooked hopscotch squares on the sidewalk. I walked home feeling both very light and very heavy, which is the particular way a person feels right before a truth settles. Inside my cottage, I set the kettle on and opened the drawer where I kept Harold's old tools, a screwdriver, a tape measure, a little flashlight with paint splattered on the handle. Underneath those was the small, discreet box I'd bought that morning from the hardware store on the edge of town. The young man behind the counter had called it a nanny cam, and I had smiled. There was no nanny here. Just an old woman who had loved the same house for 50 years, and was being asked to leave it quietly. I turned the box over in my hands. Reading the simple instructions: plug, place, pair with phone, record. All right, I whispered to Harold's memory, the way some women talk to saints. Measure twice. Cut once. But before any camera was placed, the mask slipped further. 2 days later, Lily invited me to tea. She had set the table beautifully, linen napkins, the good china that had been mine before it was theirs, lemon slices swimming in a glass bowl. The air smelled like Earl Grey and something bright and citrusy that probably cost more than the tea. Sit, she said, gesturing as if I were a guest. We made small talk for exactly 2 minutes, the weather, the church rummage sale, a woman we both knew who had adopted a second cat. Then Lily folded her hands, leaned forward just a fraction, and said, You know, I've been thinking. This arrangement, you being so close, always stopping by, it's not healthy for us. For me and Nathan, we need space, privacy. You haven't been shy about asking for help with the laundry, I said mildly. That's different, she said, dismissing the fact with the flick of a polished nail. I mean emotional space. I stirred my tea and watched the lemon wheel rotate like a small moon. What does that look like to you? Boundaries, she said. Like you texting before you come. Or better yet, having a standing lunch once a month, and otherwise, I don't know. Keeping to your cottage. Letting us be newlyweds. You've been married a year, I said. She sipped delicately. We're still building our own family. And frankly, the house, it needs to reflect us. Not you, not your husband. You had your time, Evelyn. The way she said my name was a tiny violence, and the oaks on County Road 5, I said. Was that your idea of a reflection? She set her cup down carefully, as if anything might shatter. I called, she said, unabashed. Just to get information. Tours, availability. They were very friendly. You'd be happy there. My happiness seems very important to you, I said. It is, she said, and I finally heard what she meant. Your absence is important to me. Does Nathan know you called them? I asked. She smiled and shook her head, almost pitying. Nathan trusts me, she repeated. He knows I'm doing what's best for our marriage. Then she leaned in and patted my hand, a movement so practiced it might as well have been choreography. You've had a good run here, Mom, but it's time to make room. The line lodged in me like a splinter. I saw my kitchen as it had been when Nathan was 8, cereal bowls sweating on the counter, soccer cleats by the back door. I saw Harold in his flannel, humming along to the radio while he sanded a window frame. I saw the dent in the hallway wall where a science fair volcano had gone sideways. A life is made of dents and stains and the muscle memory of voices calling up the stairs. I see, I said. And meant it. I finished my tea, washed my cup in her sink. Yes, her sink. For now, and walked home with my cardigan over my arm and a plan walking beside me like a quiet friend. At the cottage, I cleared the crumbs from the counter, wiped the table, and opened the little box again. The camera sat in my palm, small and unremarkable. I paired it to my phone, watched the tiny preview window flicker to life, and felt something in my chest loosen. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was relief, the kind you feel when a picture finally comes into focus, and you're no longer straining to guess at shapes. If truth needed a witness, then I would be the usher who walked it to its seat. I waited until evening, when the sky went soft and blue and the streetlights blinked awake one by one. I walked to the house on Maple Street with a basket of clean linens and the calm of a woman who has done her measuring. I asked Lily if I could drop the sheets in the hall closet. She waved a distracted hand, phone to her ear, eyes on her reflection in the black TV screen. In the living room, where sunlight always smeared itself wide across the rug in the afternoons. I placed the small camera among the porcelain birds on the bookshelf, little white sparrows Harold had given me on one anniversary because we couldn't afford anything grand. The lens looked like another glossy eye. The device made no sound, no light. It simply saw. Thank you for the tea, I called, stepping back into the hall. Of course, she said. We'll be in touch. On the walk home, a breeze lifted the edges of my hair and carried the smell of someone's barbecue across the twilight. I thought of my son in a hotel room, ironing a shirt with the little iron they hide in drawers. I thought of him returning to a house he believed was gentle to his mother and loving to his wife. I thought of his face when he would have to choose between what he'd been told and what he would now see. At the garden gate, I paused and looked up at the sky. It had gone dark enough to show the first steady star. I put my hand on the picket, its paint worn smooth by years of opening and closing, and said, "All right." The night answered with crickets. I went inside, set my phone on the counter, and watched the preview window. The living room stared back, quiet, innocent, waiting. I didn't feel brave. I felt old, tired, and very certain. Which, at my age, is a kind of bravery. The next move belonged to her. Part 4. The reaction action. Approximately equals 1,100 words. I didn't march or rage or call anyone to collect my outrage like change in a jar. I made soup, watered the petunias, and kept my appointments. I waved at the mailman. I slept with the phone on the knitstand and the little preview window open, the living room of the Maple Street house glowing, There like a stage waiting for actors. The first scene came that same evening. Lily walked in from the kitchen with a wineglass and the slow sway of a woman alone with her reflection. She checked her lipstick in the black of the TV, practiced a smile, and then, softly, almost kindly, said to the empty air, "She doesn't belong here." She said it the way a person says. "This rug clashes with the curtains." I watched, not blinking, as she made a call. "Hey," she purred, "come by. Nathan's away. It'll be fun?" She glanced over her shoulder toward the hall like even the walls could tattle. "No, she won't come tonight." I handled that. The camera caught that little grin she made afterward, the one that started at one corner of her mouth and never reached the other. I tapped the timestamp. Saved the clip. Named it something plain. Thursday, 8:17 p.m. living room, measure twice, cut once. The next afternoon, I carried over a pan of baked ziti and a smile that had weathered real storms. I texted first. She didn't answer. I rang the bell anyway. She opened the door half a foot, her hip keeping it from swinging wide. "Oh, hi," she said, bright as ever, eyes calculating. "Leave it on the porch, Mom. I'm in the middle of a decluttering project." "Of course," I said. "Eat while it's hot." She closed the door and I stood a moment, listening to the muffled sound of music slip under it, the bass soft as a heartbeat. When I turned to go, I noticed the ceramic frog on the porch, the one that used to hide our spare key, had been moved to the far corner, face turned toward the siding like a child in a timeout. I put my hand on its cool back and felt a simple, old ache. That evening, my phone lit, the living room again. Two of Lily's friends sat with their feet tucked under them, wineglasses wobbling on the coffee table. They laughed in that unkind, clever way that young people call wit when they're sure no one older is listening. "She still knocks like she owns the place," one said. Rolling her eyes, "She gave them this museum," Lily answered, picking at a cuticle. "And we're supposed to keep dusting the antiques of her feelings. It's exhausting." "Tell Nathan," the other friend sang. "Boys love a damsel." Lily's face did an interesting thing then, a flicker, like the briefest hiccup in the electricity. "He thinks she's sweet," Lily said. "He's sentimental." "I'm fixing it." I saved the clip. Friday 9:03 p.m. company. I didn't stop being me. The next morning, I took muffins to the church kitchen and sorted hymnals with Mary Ellen, who had a radar for trouble and the gossip to go with it. "How's Lily settling?" she asked too casually. "Like a queen on a throne," I said. "Don't worry. Thrones get heavy." She peered at me over the tops of her glasses. "You all right, Evelyn?" "I'm measuring," I said. She didn't know what I meant, but she patted my forearm anyway. I went to the hardware store for picture hooks I didn't need and a second camera I hadn't planned to buy. The young man rang me up without a blink. In a small town, people pretend not to know what they know, so you can keep your dignity. I thanked him and slid the box into my tote with the receipts Harold would have insisted I keep. That afternoon, Lily texted, "Could you grab your Afghan from the living room? It doesn't match." There was a heart emoji after the request, the modern fig leaf. I replied, "I'll stop by at 3. She wrote, "I won't be home." But sure. No key under the frog anymore, no trust in the hinges, but my key turned in the lock. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of some citrus spray that felt like an apology for absence. I folded my sister's old orange squared Afghan brave, yes, and loud as the 70s, and set it gently in my tote. Then I tucked the second camera into the spine of the bookshelf on the opposite wall, disguised between a dictionary and a wedding album. The lens looked out through dust I hadn't had the heart to wipe because dust sometimes keeps our fingerprints. I checked the phone. Both feeds winked awake, a quiet doubled vigilance. Sunday came, and I kept my porch promise to Nathan. I called to say I was well. He told me the training was dense, the coffee thin. He missed home. He missed her. He missed me. "You and Lily doing okay?" he asked, casual with effort. "We're finding our rhythm," I said. "Travel safe." After church, I sat with my phone propped against the sugar bowl and watched the living room while I shelled peas. The sounds of my cottage layered with the images from that house. Kettle ping, clock click, on-screen silence. It calmed me the way weather radios calm people in tornado country. The scenes trickled in. Lily practiced speeches to the empty room. "We need space, Mom," she said to no one. "We need privacy." Sometimes she tried different versions. "It's not good for you to be so attached." Or, "You've had your time here." She tested each line like a key in a lock. Once, she stood inches from a frame that held a faded photo of Nathan covered in cake on his first birthday. And she murmured, "You don't live here anymore." The picture did not answer back. I saved the clip anyway, and then there were the moments that mattered most because they were unguarded. The doorbell. My face is in the camera's far edge, bringing a casserole I'd promised. Lily opened the door, smiling wide enough to show kindness to a passing car. "Mom," she'd chirp, "you're too good to us." The door would close. The smile would fall. She'd whisper, "God, she's always here." She'd mimic my slow step, my soft way of speaking. The camera did not care if she was trying to be funny. It saw what it saw. I didn't watch every second. I took my walks. I paid the electric bill. I watered the hydrangeas that bloomed where they pleased. But every evening, I sat with a pot of tea and named files with dates and times, letting the sequence become a story a son could not call a misunderstanding. I put the clips on a flash drive with a fat blue label because I learned the hard way not to trust phones or clouds with the things that matter. I also pulled out the folder Harold and I had made, the one with the deed and the life estate language he'd called our belt and suspenders. I read it with my reading glasses slid to the end of my nose and a pen tracing line by line. I called our lawyer, an old friend who still answered his own phone, and asked him to explain it to me again, as if I were tired because I was. He did, with patience. "Evelyn," he said gently, "your right to live there, should you choose, is as sturdy as oak." "Good," I said. I hope I never need to knock on that oak. But I wanted to know the door would hold. He chuckled. "It will." I slept better that night. Not because a paper could save me from a person, but because preparation steadied my hands. On Tuesday, the first real storm finally rolled through. The sky went the color of old bruises by noon, and by 3 the rain came sideways. I watched the living room and saw Lily fling open the door to 2 friends, wet and laughing. They tracked water onto Harold's old rug and didn't notice. They threw cushions onto the floor and snapped selfies with the console table behind them, the one Harold had put together from a yard sale door and a pair of sawhorses. The captions later would probably read "Cozy Rain Day." I saved the footage of their shoes, their dripping, careless joy. Not because wet feet were a crime. Lord knows kids dragged the lake through that room for years. But because they told the truth about what the house had become under her reign. A backdrop. Around 5, my doorbell rang sharply and staccato. I opened it to find Lily on my stoop, umbrella dripping, face calm, voice sugary as the tea she didn't drink. "Mom, I wanted to check on you in the storm." "Kind of you," I said, stepping aside. She looked around the cottage like she always did, turning the air to a temperature that made my knuckles ache. "You should consider a generator," she said, as if she were my insurance agent. "When you're alone, outages are dangerous." "I've been alone longer than you've been an adult," I said, not unkindly. She tilted her head. "That's exactly my point." We stood in that sweet, sour silence polite people make. Then she placed a glossy folder on my table. "Just information," she said. The oaks at County Road 5 smiled up at me from the cover in clean, happy font. "They have a shuttle to church," she added, as if God himself had partnered with their marketing department. "I'll read it," I said, and meant it. I always read what tries to move me. Then I decide whether it gets to. On her way out, she paused with her hand on my doorframe. "Nathan trusts me," she said softly. "When he gets back, we're going to make some changes. Please, don't make this harder than it has to be." I felt old then, not in my bones, but in my memory. I thought of every doorframe my body had leaned against while I listened to the wind decide if it was a friend. "I don't make hard things," I said. "I name them." She blinked. She recovered. "See you soon, Mom." After she left, I made a casserole for the freezer and labeled it for when someone needs feeding. Then I sat down with my little pile of evidence and watched it through like a movie. The smiles, the slips, the unkindness she kept wrapped in silk. I didn't add commentary. I did not plan speeches or rehearse punishments. I made a playlist of truth with timestamps and let the facts breathe on their own. Asterisk that night, the storm knocked the lights out for an hour. In the dark, with the rain worrying the roof, I sat by the window and counted my breaths the way Harold taught me after his diagnosis. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 6. The power kicked back with a pop, and my phone buzzed. Flight lands Wednesday at 7:40 p.m. Nathan. Good, I said to the quiet room. Very good. I put the flash drive in my purse. I folded a clean handkerchief into my pocket, not because I intended to cry, but because a mother never sends her child into hard news without a softness offered. And then I did the bravest thing I know an old woman can do. I slept out in the morning. I baked a pound cake and set it to cool. I watered the plants. I wrote a short note and tucked it inside my Bible because there are some conversations you want your husband to overhear, even if he's long past the hearing. Asterisk by late afternoon. I set 2 mugs on my counter and turned the kettle on low, so it would be ready when the door opened later and my son walked through it with travel in his shoulders and trust in his eyes. I would not speak first. I would not accuse. I would press play. Because patience is not passivity. It is preparation, and the game Lily had started was about to show her who taught me to play. I timed the kettle to sigh just before Nathan's headlights turned into the drive. The porch light laid a soft triangle on the steps, the way it always had when my boy came home from late practices and then late shifts and now late flights. I stood with 2 mugs and a handkerchief folded in my pocket. The flash drive sat beside the sugar bowl like any ordinary thing. His key scraped the lock. Then he was there, hair rumpled from airplane sleep, coat over his arm, the smell of airport air and hotel soap clinging to him. He smiled when he saw me. It lifted something old and heavy inside my chest. "Mom," he said, setting his bag down and bending to hug me. "You're a sight." "Sit," I said, and I said it the way I used to when he was small and hot-cheeked from a fever. "Tea?" He nodded. He looked tired in that soft, human way good men do when they've been away from home too long. I poured the tea and pushed the sugar toward him. He took 2 like always, stirred, and took a sip with a low aha, as if his cells recognized the ritual. "How's Lily?" he asked, the question already halfway to kindness. "She's well," I said. "I have something to show you." He blinked, the smile dimming just a shade. "Mom?" I picked up the flash drive and the little laptop I use to look at pictures of the garden in winter. I didn't dress it up. I didn't narrate. I slid the drive in and opened the folder that wore its dates like a simple, undeniable necklace. "Nathan," I said softly. "I'm going to press play. Watch, then we'll talk." He looked like a man bracing to hear a diagnosis he didn't want. But he nodded, set his cup down, and turned his face toward the screen. I clicked the first clip. Thursday, 8:17 p.m. Lily alone with her wineglass. Lily saying, "She doesn't belong here." His jaw tightened, barely. He didn't speak. I clicked the second. Friday, 9:03 p.m. The Friends. The laughter. The museum of my feelings. The word fixing. "Nathan," I said gently, "there are more." He reached for the trackpad himself then, a small tremor in his fingers, and opened the next file. Lily is practicing speeches in an empty room. Lily opened the door to me with one smile and closed it with another. Lily tucking the Oaks brochure beneath my sugar canister. We watched in a silence so thick I could hear the clock's second hand like a tiny metronome. He fast-forwarded once, then stopped on the clip of her saying to the picture of our cake-smeared boy, "You don't live here anymore." A sound escaped him then. Not a sob, not a word. Just a low thing people make when something inside them is rearranging. He pressed pause and sat back. He covered his mouth with his hand the way he did when he needed time to put his face in order. Then he stood. He didn't look at me. He lifted his bag, set it by the door again, and said, voice low and steady, "Is she home?" "She should be," I said. "The living room light was on an hour ago." He nodded once. Then he looked at me, really looked, and his eyes were those same blue-gray pools I had memorized when he was a baby, full of fear and determination in equal measure. "Mom," he said. I'm sorry you had to carry this alone. I didn't carry it alone, I told him. Your father sat with me in the quiet. And I chose to wait for you. He bent and pressed his lips to my forehead. I'll be back, he said, and left. I stood in the doorway and watched him cross the short stretch of dark between my cottage and the house on Maple Street. The night held its breath. A dog barked twice and gave up. The porch light over there flicked on when Nathan stepped onto the stoop. I couldn't hear the words, but the camera feed on my phone showed the picture, the door opening, Lily's face lifting, and then changing the way a sky changes when a storm drops its disguise. He didn't raise his voice. I could tell by the set of his shoulders. He stepped inside. The door closed with the final little click I had always loved about that latch. Harold hung straight. I turned away. I made more tea and busied my hands, because there are moments a mother must not witness in order to keep from becoming a rope in a tug of war. The kettle breathed. The clock ticked. I wiped a countertop already clean. After a while, my phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. I'm bringing some things over. Could you unlock the back door? I did. 10 minutes later, the back door opened, and my son came in with an armful of clothes. He set them gently on the chair and went back for another load. On his third trip, he brought his toiletries and that little iron from the house drawer he always liked. He placed them on my counter as if returning borrowed time. He didn't speak until his hands were empty. Then he said, "She said I made her feel judged. She said you were smothering. She said the videos were out of context." "And what did you say?" I asked. He swallowed. I said context was the couch she was sitting on, and the rug under her feet, and the house she called hers because you had given it to us. I said respect is not a buffet. He rubbed his eyes with his knuckles, suddenly my gangly teenager again. I didn't shout, Mom. I wanted to. But I didn't. I know, I said. I'm staying here tonight, he said. Tomorrow, I'll make arrangements. I nodded. There are clean sheets on the bed. We didn't talk much after that. He showered. I folded one of his t-shirts out of habit and then unfolded it, smiling at myself. I left a glass of water by the bed like I had when he was small, because some instincts are not negotiable. When the house went quiet, I sat a while and spoke my thanks into the dark, not triumph, not gloating, just gratitude for truth arriving when it needed to. Morning came in gently. The rain had washed the sky. The birds worked the hedges like it was their job, which it was. I brewed coffee and scrambled eggs with more care than eggs require. Nathan came into the kitchen barefoot, hair damp, face unguarded. He looked at home. Not the house kind of home, the mother kind. I'll be back, he said after breakfast, voice level. I'm going to pack her a bag. I won't be cruel. Be clear, I said. Clear is kind. He nodded, kissed my cheek, and walked back to the big house. I didn't check the camera, not right away. I washed dishes and opened the kitchen window, and let October air run its fingers through my curtains, when my phone buzzed again. It was a single line, "It's done." I stepped to the porch and looked down the street. Outside the iron gate of the Maple Street house sat a neat row of luggage, 2 rolling suitcases and a tote with gold hardware. No scattered boxes. No theatrics. Just a decision made visible. Nathan stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other in his pocket. Lily was not in sight. He came down the walk toward me. His face was pale but steady. She's going to stay with a friend, he said. We'll talk later with someone present. But not here. Not like this. I searched his face for regret, for self-reproach, for that old reflex that makes decent people try to put the brokenness in their pocket and carry it for everyone. What I saw instead was something like adulthood edged with grief, the kind that remembers love and refuses harm. Neighbors notice things. Maple Street was no exception. Curtains stirred. Mr. Hollis's flag ticked against its pole like a metronome for the town's heartbeat. Mary Ellen slowed her car at the corner, took in the luggage with one quick look, and kept driving. By noon, the church prayer chain would be humming under its breath, full of words like concern and lift up. By evening, someone would ask me gently, Evelyn, how are you doing? And I would tell the truth, better than I feared, sadder than I wanted. Before any of that, Lily returned with a friend whose face I knew by sight if not by name. She did not meet my eyes as she loaded the suitcases into the trunk. She moved efficiently, chin high, sunglasses despite the soft light. At the last minute, she turned toward the porch where Nathan and I stood. "This is humiliating," she said flatly. "This is private," Nathan replied, voice even. "And it will stay as private as your behavior allows." Her mouth tightened. For a fleeting second, something softer and truer flared in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or the ache of a story she'd been telling herself for so long it had calcified. I felt a tug of old woman mercy, but I did not move toward her. Mercy is not the same as permission. She got into the car. The friend backed out carefully. The gate clicked shut behind them. The street exhaled. Nathan stood very still. Then he turned to me and leaned his head briefly on my shoulder, taller than me by a head, and still, somehow, small as a boy. "I'm sorry," he said again, not for her, not for himself, but for the whole sad detour. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry too." We went back inside and I poured coffee we didn't need. "I didn't say I told you. I didn't say, how could you not see?" That would have been meanness dressed in righteousness. And I have lived too long to wear that badly sewn dress. By afternoon. It was done, not all of it, not the legal or the counseling or the hard, quiet work of untangling two lives, but the public part. The neighbors' eyes had their story. The church would have its prayers. The town would do what towns do, hold both of us in that strange hammock of pity and respect. And I, who had been called naive and then patient, made myself a cup of tea in my own good kitchen and stood by the window where the light likes to fall. I whispered, "Because old women learn to talk to truth like it's a shy child. You thought I was naive, but I was just patient." The steam curled upward. Somewhere down the block, a boy on a bicycle whooped, and the sound bounced off the houses like a blessing that didn't need words. The house on Maple Street was quiet for the first time in months. Not tense, not guarded, just quiet. I could almost hear the wood settling, the kind of creak that sounds like a sigh after holding its breath too long. Nathan spent the next few days fixing things that didn't really need fixing. He repainted the front steps, tightened cabinet hinges that had no reason to loosen. I think he needed to feel his hands working to give shape to something that would stay put. When he was done, he'd sit on the porch steps in the evening light, a beer in his hand, staring at the garden. "You know," he said one night, his voice softer than the dusk around us, "I used to think this place would always smell like her perfume." "It will," I said, "for a little while. Then it'll go back to smelling like us, coffee dust and baked chicken." He chuckled, and then the sound turned into something like a sigh. "I should have believed you sooner." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You should have believed yourself. That's the hard part of love. We keep rewriting the truth until it fits the story we wish was real." He stared down at his hands. "She made me feel like loving you meant betraying her." I reached over, squeezed his wrist gently. "Good people get tangled in other people's fear. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." We sat in silence after that. The porch light flickered to life on its timer, and a moth began tapping gently against the bulb. A week later, the church ladies came by under the noble disguise of a casserole drop-off. Mary Ellen stood in the doorway with a pan of lasagna and the eyes of someone desperate for detail, but trying to look holy about it. "We've been praying for you," she said, with the same tone people use to say, "We've been talking about you." I smiled because at this age, you learn there's no real difference between the two. "Then keep praying," I said. "But pray that we all learn to see clearly before we speak loudly." Her eyebrows lifted just enough to suggest she'd repeat that line later, after they left. I portioned the lasagna into smaller dishes for the freezer. I found a rhythm in it. Fold the foil, label the lid, stack neatly. There's a strange comfort in small order when the big things have unraveled. Nathan started therapy a month later. He said he needed to understand why he'd looked at red flags and seen roses. I told him therapy was a kind of gardening, pulling the weeds before they took over the soil. Sometimes he'd come by afterward, quiet but lighter. We'd sit on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea, and let the conversation find us. Once he said, "She called last week. Said she misses me. What did you say? I asked. That I miss who I thought she was, he said. Then he smiled, small but real. That felt honest, I nodded. Honest has a way of feeling lighter, doesn't it? He nodded. Yeah, lighter and a little lonely. Truth is lonely at first, I said. But it's the only thing that doesn't turn on you in the dark. He looked at me the way sons look at mothers when they realize the years have made them equals in understanding, if not in age. You always know what to say, he murmured. I don't, I said, sipping my tea. I just stopped pretending I don't know what's true. Time did what it always does, moved forward, one quiet morning at a time. The gossip faded. The pity turned into polite curiosity, and then into something kinder, respect. People nodded when they saw me at the farmer's market, like maybe they were seeing me for the first time. I didn't need that, but it was nice. The garden bloomed early that spring. The hydrangeas, stubborn as ever, came in uneven blues and purples. I caught myself talking to them sometimes, like Harold used to, about the weather, about Nathan, about how quiet peace really sounds after the noise ends. One morning, Nathan came by with a cardboard box and a sheepish grin. For you, he said, setting it on the counter. Inside was a new coffee maker, sleek, shiny, smarter than I'll ever be. I thought it might be time to retire the old one, he said. This one doesn't sputter. I ran my hand along the chrome, smiling. Honey, sputtering is what makes the coffee taste alive. He laughed, and for the first time in a long time, the laugh didn't have a shadow behind it. Later that week, I went into town for groceries. At the checkout, I saw Lily standing in line 2 registers down. She was alone, hair shorter, face bare of its usual armor. She looked ordinary human. She saw me too. For a second, we just looked at each other, no words, no gestures, just 2 women who had survived the same storm from opposite sides of the glass. Then she nodded. Not proud, not pleading, just a nod that said, I see it now. I nodded back. Then I turned to pay for my groceries. Some things don't need to be said to be forgiven. When I got home, I put the groceries away, poured myself a glass of sweet tea, and stepped out to the porch. The afternoon sun lay its warmth across the garden, and the world looked merciful again. I thought about Harold, about patience, about the kind of quiet strength women build in secret. It isn't the kind that shouts or seeks applause. It's the kind that keeps the kettle warm and the door unlocked for whoever needs truth told gently. I took a slow sip, the way I always do when something has finally settled in its rightful place, and I whispered, to the air, to the house, to the memory of every woman who's ever been underestimated. You thought I was naive, but I was just patient. You know, sweetheart, patience is a strange thing. Folks think it means sitting still, waiting quietly while the world walks all over you. But that's not patience. Real patience is knowing when to move slowly so truth can catch up. I didn't trap Lily. I didn't destroy her. I just let her reveal herself. Sometimes people do that if you give them enough quiet space. Silence, I've learned, is a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see in it. When I was younger, I thought strength meant raising my voice. These days, I know strength sometimes means folding your hands in your lap and saying, all right, dear, while you let someone build their own rope. The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, that's the one that lasts. Nathan and I still live close. He comes by most evenings now, sometimes just to sit and listen to the frogs start up down by Miller's Creek. We don't talk about Lily much anymore. Not because we're avoiding it, but because we've made peace with it. You can't live inside a wound and expect to heal. I still think of her though. Sometimes when I see young women hurrying through town in heels too high and smiles too bright, I wonder what taught them that gentleness was weakness. Maybe one day Lily will learn that lesson too, the hard way, the real way. I hope she does. Life's kinder when you stop confusing kindness with surrender. I pour my morning coffee, listen to the pot sputter and sigh, and I think of Harold. He used to tell me, measure twice, cut once, you. And maybe that's all I did. I measured long enough to make sure the cut was clean. No yelling. No vengeance. Just truth. So when people ask me now, how did you find the courage to expose her? I smile and tell them the truth. I didn't find courage, honey. I found patience. And that's where I'll leave it with you, my dear listener. Would you have done what I did? Would you have waited, quietly, while the truth wrote its own ending? Tell me in the comments, sweetheart. And if you've ever had to learn patience the hard way, well, pour yourself a cup of tea and stay a while.